Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds to allow more people to join us. This session is being recorded, so you will be able to go back and review anything that you missed or rewatch this entire session. Once we post it on our counseling services website, it will be posted within the next 48 hours. I've dropped some information into the chat. We do have a service available if you would like to hear this information in another language. You will go to that link that's posted in the chat, and it will take you to a website where you'll log in and you'll be able to hear and read this information in the language that you prefer. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our guests from Resilient Wilco, Dorothy Light and Lynn Kessel, who will be talking to us today about the science of building resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. We appreciate it. As Dr. Lewis said, this is Lynn Kessel and Dorothy Light, and we're talking to you from a working collaborative called Resilient Wilco. We're all about building resilience in families and kids. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about that science of resilience and those key aspects of the relationship. Lynn and I are going to be speaking professionally, but we're also going to be speaking personally. So we're trying to keep this out of that kind of standard lecture format. So you're going to hear Lynn and I, yes, presenting some slides and some neuroscience, but we're also just going to be talking. What has been your experience? How are you applying these things? What works? And, you know, we have a few tricks up our sleeves, some things that we want to share with you that we think you could turn around and apply with your kids at home, with yourself, your husband, any kind of strategies around building resilience in your home. So just know that that's where we're going to go with this. As a quick overview of our presentation last time, which I think it was maybe right before the big storm hit. So I know some people were on and some people not. I think it's on the website, but just as a quick review, our first part of the series, which was our last talk, we talked about the developmental nature of some of our neural networks. We talked about our brain architecture and our nervous system as not only responding to our relationships and responding to the world around us, but literally getting cued and built and cultivated as we grow. And that brain architecture that we develop, those sort of set points that we develop in our nervous system, they last throughout our lifetime. So we're going to be very intentional about talking to you about some of that today. We're also going to be talking about maybe our internal and our external world, or our kids' internal and external world. And we don't always think of our kids as, you know, their inner dialogues or their inner states, but we're going to be talking about some of that today and wondering, how can we work with that? How can we apply some of this science? But first, we're going to review a little bit more in depth some of the key points that we talked about last time. And something important to remember is that stress, when we talk about stress, there are 3 different types of stress. There's that positive stress, that brief increase in heart rate. We feel our elevated hormone levels, maybe our breath gets short and shallow. And then there's tolerable stress. And that's the stress that's maybe a little more chronic or pervasive, a little more serious in nature. It's picking up, our body's picking up on some prolonged stress responses and starting to wonder, wait a second, this is a little more than I bargained for. what is it that I needed to be planning for? Our body is going to start responding if that may or may not become the norm. And then toxic stress. This is literally toxic to our bodies because this level of prolonged stress activation or intense stress activation can literally kill off cells in our bodies through excess hormone levels or even our nerve cells in our brain. So we want to just take a moment to distinguish those, but also talk about between every level, between the positive and the tolerable and the tolerable and the toxic, there's room for intervention. There's room for a relationship. There's room for some key supportive factors to help that child get back to a healthier state and grow. And so we're going to be talking about that. I know, COVID is here. One of the things I think of as COVID is everybody has a different COVID story. Like everybody can say, oh, this is so stressful or that's so stressful. Some kids have really blossomed. Some families have bonded. Other families have had lots of stress. Even some families I've noticed, well, one child is just doing great, but another one is really struggling and the stress is building. So anytime that Lynn and I talk about stress and some strategies and buffer factors, just note that's going to be independent to each child. And when we're talking about stress in kids, as you guys know, variation is the norm. Lynn, is there something else you wanted to say about stress? I know we talked a little bit about this last time.
Well, what I'd like to do is connect a couple of the points that Dorothy has made here. So we last time we did talk about the development of our brains, of our nervous system, neural connections, and so forth, and how important that is. That's such an incredible system in our bodies that just takes in input in all sorts of ways and then interprets things for our brains, and then we react accordingly. And so when you kind of combine that information with what Dorothy was just talking about and the three different sort of levels of stress, if you will, it's important to realize that our brains and our nervous systems are wiring and developing based on those experiences. So the types of environments, the types of experiences that we grow up with are actually informing how our brain is wiring and how our nervous system is developing. The relationships that we have also play a big part in this. And those relationships can either buffer or further exacerbate perhaps the stress levels that a young child may be experiencing. So too much stress or toxic stress, for example, can impact how our brain is wired to respond to stress. And I think to Dorothy's point about how individualized this is, that's really important to understand, because what might be stressful for me may not be stressful for Dorothy. And so my stress response system might get going over a situation and Dorothy's sitting there pretty chill, not feeling anything. And that's normal and that's okay. But just to recognize that there can be differences between individuals. And as Dorothy said, even between your own children. Children can respond differently to the various stressors in their lives. And so you notice that people have different breaking points. Even amongst your children, you can see that they just have this point where it's just been too much stress for them. But perhaps another one is a little bit stronger, a little bit more resilient. And those differences are very normal. Next slide. So we talked about this a little bit as well, is the adaptations, how our system and how our brain has been wired and how we behave accordingly, when faced with stress, what our typical behaviors are, how that collides potentially with some social expectations that may be out there. So before I give you an example, I just want to explain that any of those adaptations, maybe it's hypervigilance, maybe it's withdrawal, maybe it's isolation, any of these things are actually not maladaptive. They're very adaptive, again, to the environments or experiences that that child, has been experiencing. So the problem comes into when they're wired to respond to stress in a certain way based on their experiences, but then they're in an environment where it really isn't stressful, where it really isn't that scary or challenging. An example might be a child in a classroom, and the teacher calls the kid out and says, hey, Johnny, have you done your homework? No, I haven't. Well, can you answer this question then for the classroom? And that kid responds as if a bear has come into the room, a very, very high stress response level to that, because that child feels very unsafe. And so their stress response system is reacting to something in a classroom as if, something quite threatening might be happening to them. And that's where the clash comes. That's where the collision occurs between some of the adaptations that young children have to the sort of expectations and the environments that they're now in. Now, the good news is that can be trained, brains can be rewired, and children can be taught skills to be able to deal with various different environments and so forth. And so one of the things that I think is important for anybody with kids or anybody dealing with kids in school environments or, different agencies that you might work in and so forth, what's really important is how we look at that outward behavior. So sometimes that behavior on the outside that child is exhibiting may be inappropriate or defiant, or these would be typical words that we might use to describe some of these behaviors. But what's important is we need to look through the lens of understanding that there's something underneath that behavior. What's the root of that behavior? And typically it's survival behavior. It's rooted out of trying to maintain safety and equilibrium in myself, in oneself. And that's what's underneath it. If you look through the lens and see those behaviors as survival behaviors, then you're really looking at the situation in a very trauma-informed fashion. And it opens up the opportunity to take a look at prevention and how can we intervene here with this child to get a better outcome and help the child understand what might be going on.
Lynn, I just appreciate that example. And, one of the things that you were talking about in terms of, the child's being asked a question, right? But it feels like a bear. That's a nervous system response, right? I think we've all heard that, like, if a bear were in the woods, that would put you in survival. Would you run or flee or fight, or what would you do, right?
Yes.
And I think we've all heard that example. But I think sometimes as an adult, because we're there in the room, right? Like that teacher just asked a question. So in her mind, there is not a survival situation. Or I know with my kids, I can even understand the science, but willful disobedience at my house might look like someone yelling at me, or someone just slammed the door, or someone just, whatever rule violation there is in the house, right? Refusal to do chores or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, that's not survival mode, because I know that he's fine, right? And I think what you're saying is, it really, survival mode is based on their internal experience. It's not what we see in the external world, it's their internal experience. So the kids get to tell you, or us knowing them and learning about them, is that how we distinguish they're in survival mode versus they're just mouthing off or they're just yelling?
Well, I think something, yes, I think, Dorothy, something that's really important is to have that conversation with that child, is just to understand, wow, you know, I just asked you to take the trash out and you blew up and you slammed the door and you got real angry. Hey, what's going on? What's happening here? And really trying to get underneath that. I think that the patience to do that, and then the relationship and trust that you will build as you try to seek understanding from your child, from your student, you know, whoever, will go miles in terms of that child's success. I think the other thing to consider too is, as you're dealing with a child who may be having these kind of difficult behaviors, you've got to check yourself too. You know, are you, as the adult, are you getting triggered by these negative behaviors? Is that bothering you enough that now you're kind of coming across a little sterner than you needed to? And if so, all that's going to do is create a less trustful sort of situation. That child is not going to feel safe. The child may not feel safe to come talk to you or engage in a conversation to help you understand, or anything. So as adults, we've got to check ourselves as well, and make sure that that behavior, even if we don't know what's underneath it yet, isn't triggering us into a state that's not very calm.
Yes, agreed.
It's very common, and it's tough to do, but the science is so clear about, hey, maintain your calm and your regulation, and that child in front of you will much more likely mirror that if that's what you're showing them. So
I appreciate that. And I just want to pause here because we went over a lot of neuroscience around stress in the brain really quickly. But we just wanted to leave space here before we go into some of the tips and strategies and a little bit deeper into what Lynn and I have started talking about, to see any questions. I saw someone raise their hand, but I couldn't quite figure out how to get to them.
We did have someone raise their hand. So if you have a question, because this is a webinar, you don't have access to ask it verbally, so you don't have access to a microphone. You can enter your question or comment into the chat. And if you hover over the bottom of your screen, there will be a little chat button that pops up. If you're on your cell phone, if you haven't touched your screen in a while, you can tap your screen and you'll see it at the bottom of your cell phone. We do have a question in the question and answer. And you touched on this a little bit, but how can you tell if what your child is showing is a problem or is normal kid stuff?
you want to go for it, Dorothy?
I'll start it off and then you fill in because I feel like in a certain sense, if we're looking at it from adaptation, it's all normal, meaning it's normal for kids to try to figure out what works for them. If I'm stressed, I'm going to want to control things. I'm going to maybe be angry, or I'm going to want to run, or I'm going to want to argue. All of those are my natural stress responses. And the more stressed I feel, the more I'm going to control, the more I'm going to be, whatever my extreme behaviors are. So to me, that's normal. I think when it becomes not normal or time to check in, maybe with my partner or a counselor at school, is when it's really impacting the level of family functioning. It's more than just a one-off of, every once in a while we have these behaviors and they're really challenging. But when it starts interrupting family time, school time, things like that, that's usually when I try to pull in my tribe and ask for help.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. We're going to get into something a little later about energy levels and what they mean and so forth, and what you want to do with those energy levels. But frankly, normal kid behavior and then maybe, problematic behavior, if I don't see anything wrong with having a conversation with your child no matter what's going on. If something is just like super high energy and it doesn't seem like an appropriate situation for them to have high energy, well, sit down with them. Hey, buddy, what's going on here? You got lots of energy right now. Maybe help them, calm down, maybe understand what's going on. Clearly, you can have more structured conversations too when it's behaviors that you want to correct in some way. But you want to hear it out. You want to allow them to speak it out and then teach them some things, to learn about their own emotions and how do I react and how can I communicate how I'm feeling and so forth. Because these are just skills that they're needing to learn through their developmental ages.
Lynn, I kind of appreciate the kind of casualness of your response and your tone. Because, sometimes when we're worried about behavior, is it normal or not? It can be more serious behavior, but what I'm hearing you say is as parents, we can still talk to our kids about that. Like this is a bigger thing. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a school counselor, but I know you and I care about you and I want to talk about that. And I know sometimes at my house, especially with my older son, some of those behaviors got very extreme. So safety is always a concern. If it was a safety issue, I would definitely talk to someone, but I would also talk to my son. And what you're reminding me is that conversation can go two ways, that kind of like overreaction or very fearful about their behaviors can kind of throw a little fuel on that fire. But even talking about the big stuff in a calm way, maybe we don't have all the answers, that's at least opening a door.
Yes.
Right?
Definitely.
I'm thinking about, when the toddler falls and then like everybody goes, oh, right? And then he just cries and cries. I mean, we have teenage versions of that, especially with social media and stuff. Our kids are doing stuff that we never, ever thought they would do. And it's like, oh, oh my God. We're going to talk a little bit more about these relationships we have with our kids. And I want to talk a little bit just about the research. So Lynn and I are going to attempt to condense probably a decade plus of developmental research on relationships and how we can use relationships to support that stress response and that resilience building in our kids. And you'll see that it's specific aspects. So one is safety, and we're going to go in and we'll talk about what we mean by safety, connection, building those connections, and then skill building. And the kind of skill building that we're talking about is sharing power with our kids. How is that appropriate? Expressing concern, expanding possibilities, challenging growth. And we'll break that down a little bit and then give you some keys as to where to look for more. But Lynn, I thought of you when I think of felt safety and connection, because I just feel like with your work and all the work that you do with kids in the experience, I just feel like you're kind of a master at taking challenging situations and using them to build, wait a second, where's the safety and connection here? So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, but thank you. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I sure appreciate your kind words there. I always have lots of room to grow and learn. So two of the main elements behind resilience is safety, or what we call felt safety. And the second one is connection. So I want to go over each of those and what that really means for you here briefly. So felt safety is not only a physical safety, like, oh, thank goodness I'm not around a bear, kind of thing, but it's emotional safety too, that they feel safe with people around them. They feel safe to have their emotions expressed. They feel safe to be seen and heard without criticism, without judgment. And their whole internal experience feels safe. If you can think about walking into a room sometime, I would assume at some point in your life, you've walked into a classroom, you've walked into a party, you've walked into, whatever sort of scenarios, and somehow the inside of you just went, I don't feel good right now. And it might have to do with, I don't know who's in the room, I'm not comfortable with what's going on in the room, or there's someone there that I'm very uncomfortable, who knows what it is. But that internal feeling inside you when you don't feel safe. And so when a young child or a teenager, a youth, a child of any age have these things in place where they're physically feeling safe, emotionally and mentally feeling safe, they feel free to be able to communicate their thoughts, their feelings, then they have what we call felt safety. And what you have then is a child that you can talk to. You have a child that you can communicate to and maybe communicate something difficult. Maybe it was something that they had done wrong or whatever. Some of those tough discussions that if they're escalated, that will not go well. So if they're in this place where they feel that their side's going to be listened to as well, and they're really calm and they feel, that they trust who they're talking to, then there's probably going to be a pretty good conversation that you'll have. Now, the other piece to that is you really need to be having that connection with the child. The child's got to feel connected. So they know that they can trust you to do what you say you're going to do. You're not going to say you're going to do something and then you don't do it. They experience encouragement from you. There's maybe not only something constructive you've got to say, but there's something very positive, something very supportive that you say as well, which takes the focus off the child. You're focusing on the behavior, not the child. So when you can balance some of the critical information you're trying to share with somebody or instruction or something, if you can also talk about their strengths or something positive or be supportive of them through this difficult time, that goes a long way in terms of trust. The kid needs to feel like they're being listened to and they're able to engage with you without distraction. So you're not trying to talk to the child or the student while you're looking at your cell phone and that sort of thing. And that you're really actively engaged with them, that you're right there with them, trying to figure, okay, what are you feeling? Okay, this is what was important to me. Now, how about you? What was going on here? Sort of thing. So when you have those two things in place pretty strongly, that felt safety for the child and the connection with the child, then you're going to be able to have wonderful conversations where you're able to teach, instruct, correct, various things like that could be, sometimes some tough conversations. Now, in looking at some of the questions at the bottom there, it really doesn't matter the age of the child. I mean, the way you talk to them is going to be a little different, a 4-year-old compared to a 16-year-old, but this process is still important here. Your stress level definitely impacts how you're going to respond to your kids. So kind of back to the, are you being triggered? Just keep that in mind. And also understand that if the child that you're talking to is pretty escalated and you're having a hard time getting them calmed down and feeling like they're in a safe place, just don't go anywhere except keep them calm. Just keep working on the calm. Don't try to do that instruction piece or that correction piece until you have them in a calm place and you feel like there's a pretty good connection between the two of you. So that's what I have to say about that.
Lynn, thank you. There's a question in the chat. Renee is asking, and I can think of one example. I can do a young kid example, and then maybe you could provide an older kid, because I don't know the age she's talking about, but she's talking about, can you give us an example about how making it about the behavior and not the child? Yeah. And to me, I kind of like what you said, when I'm calm, I do this really well. And when I'm stressed and triggered, I have a hard time. But some of the behaviors I think of for little kids are kicking the back of the driver's seat when they're throwing a tantrum in the car, or throwing something, or, all those things about how to put the dishes up or how to put that up, and or brushing your teeth, and there's a difference between, I notice the kicking on the back of my seat. It's getting harder and harder. Is there something you want to tell me? That would just be about the behavior. But hey, I have had enough of this. We talked about this getting into the car, and now you're doing this. Unacceptable. That becomes a little more easy for the child to interpret. Wait a second, this is about me personally. This is not about the kicking. I'm now unacceptable, or I'm now really causing upset to my mom or my dad or whatever. But do you have maybe an older kid example of that?
Yeah, very similar. It would be the topic would be a little different. So let's say, a teenager, you've asked them to do some chores. You've asked them to do the laundry. You've asked them to take out the trash, whatever it is that their chores might be. And they don't do it. And then they don't do it again, and they don't do it again. And when you're escalated and triggered, that was a good point, Dorothy. When you're escalated and triggered, the corrective piece of that, the corrective communication that you give that teenager is likely not going to be, very nurturing. It's going to be frustrated. For example, I am so sick and tired of you not taking out the trash. You don't pay attention to instructions. You're not responsible. You're not a responsible kid. I can't believe you're my child. Things like that are very much against the human being. It's when you're pointing to them, you're saying you are blah, 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 is kind of pushing the behavior onto the child, like you're criticizing the child versus the behavior. So instead, you'd say something like, wow, can I talk to you for a minute? I've asked you over the last week 3 different times to take out the trash, and we had made an agreement, a while back that this would be your thing, to do. So can you tell me why this is so challenging? Have we picked a poor time for you to pull it out, to take out the trash? Can we negotiate this? Because in order for you to get your allowance or whatever, this is what you were supposed to do. So I'm just disappointed in the fact that you're not taking the trash out, but I know you can do it. I know you can. This is an easy thing for you. So help me to understand what's going on here. Something like that.
I appreciate that. And we're talking about connection, and can you see how one example, that connection is kind of held sacred between the parent and the child there, and another, that connection is called into question.
Yeah.
And
Dorothy,
I'm looking at our time, and yes.
I'm sorry, I just have, there's a question in the question and answer that kind of goes along with what you're talking about. And they're asking, I'm gonna summarize, but basically when your kid is out of control and you're upset, how do you make them feel safe?
Okay, can we answer that? And Dr. Lewis, please hold me accountable because we're gonna get to another slide that's like brings this point home, and we can use that
Yeah.
in the slide. And I'm thinking that time to talk slide is what I'm thinking, Lynn.
Well, yeah, there's that, both of those, both the.
Yeah,
We've got
yeah.
a couple tools.
The whole thing is about this moment because you see where it lives. It gets really, really fast. And I'll tell you, I'm going to switch slides because we are at 6:36. So I want to go through some of these slides fairly quickly so we can get to kind of the meat of some of these behaviors. Okay, so skill building. The kind of skill building that we're talking about might not be the skill building of learning how to mow the lawn or take out the trash or good grades in school, right? It's that skill building of sharing power. You know, Lynn already kind of talked about that. Hey, is this not working for you, taking out the trash? What do we need to rethink this? Expressing concern. Again, we might think that we're expressing concern, but sometimes I know, particularly when I'm stressed, I express concern and it kind of comes across as nagging, right? It's like, I think I'm expressing concern because I've reminded you 5 times that you've got that grade coming up or that test coming up. And so I'm like, I'm so concerned. I've reminded you about this. I've shown up at your school. But we're just talking about expressing concern. Hey, how are you doing? You've got a lot on your plate. How is that? How are you managing that? Expanding possibilities is about broadening horizons. And, you know, there have been times when for us, this looks like a great vacation. Sometimes this is a staycation for something fun, especially if budget is tight. But what are we doing? What are we exposing our kids to? How are we sharing new people, new things, new ideas with them? And then the challenging growth, how are we kind of establishing those boundaries and the commitments that they have to themselves, to their school, to their family in a way that's developmentally appropriate and in a way where we fully expect them to meet. What does this look like in a real life setting? I feel like, Lynn, this could be a whole entirely separate presentation. So I just want to put this out there because it is one of the main 3 factors of resilience building. But if you guys go to the Search Institute, and that's just SEARCH Institute online, they actually have a free parent questionnaire, which I took myself. I was a little nervous right before this presentation. I took it myself, and it kind of walks you through this. What are you doing? Where are you? And then some of these I scored way high and some of these were a little low right now, because that's where I am right now, right? And then it gives you activities and ideas and things that you can do. So Search Institute is a great resource for that. But I have a feeling we're going to make the most out of our time if we go back to this safety and connection conversation that we're having. And so, Lynn, I know this is, how is your engine running? It's almost like how your nervous system is running. This is our internal, what's wired and fired and going on inside. That you teach this to parents. You guys work with this. Can you walk us through this?
Yeah, definitely. So we basically talk about this engine plate or engine, well, we say engine plate for some reason because we have it in a circle sometimes. But anyway, this engine is really identifying your energy level. And this would be for your child, and this could be for yourself. And so let me explain the 3 different energy levels, if you will. The red is high energy. And that could be a couple of things. It could be, I'm high energy, I'm so excited, I'm so happy, I'm just ecstatic, and you're jumping around, you can't even control yourself. And there's also the high energy of anger. So, you know, in both those emotions to their extremes, certainly, there's a lot, you can see the energy coming out of somebody. So we teach kids to understand that the red, when you're in the red, and that's how you'd communicate it. I'm in the red today, or I'm in the red right now. You're either, you know, excited, or maybe you're pretty angry, irritated about something. So you can feel the energy in your body going, you know, quickly. Your heart's beating quickly, and whatever other physical sort of things that the child might feel. Now, the blue, on the other hand, is very low energy. And that could mean anything from I'm just super tired, to I'm depressed, I'm sad, or I'm just really chilled out here. I'm really relaxed and really comfortable, and I don't want to get up off this chair right now. So all of that is low energy. But as you can see in both things, there's kind of, I don't want to say a negative emotion, but, you know, you've got your kind of emotions on both sides of the continuum, both in red and in blue, you know, that are kind of good and bad, if you will. Now, the green is your perfect place to be. As much as you can try to be in the green, that's the best. That sort of energy level is enough energy to get done what I need to get done right now. Not too much, not too little. I feel open. I feel flexible. Sometimes you may hear those phrases of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. If you're in the green, you're really pretty open to things. You can hear people, you can shift, you can change, you can adapt. You're content. So those are some of the things that are happening when you express that you're in the green. So it's kind of energy levels, emotion levels, and so forth that you're communicating. And we use this by teaching the kids this, and then every week they're in a group where they're expressing, where am I today? I'm in the red, and they express why. And we teach them emotion words so that they can articulate with some words. Well, I'm pretty much in the red, but I could get into the green pretty easily. I'm just super irritated right now. We want to expand their vocabulary in terms of emotions, you know, the youth that we work with, so they're not just using I'm angry with everything, even when they're tired. And so, you know, trying to give them new vocabulary and things to articulate where their emotions are is important. So that's how we teach this, and we have them practice it all the time. We've also then asked them to identify, when I'm in the red, this is what I need. You know, I need 5 minutes of my own time. I need you to stop talking to me. I need, you know, something like that. So they articulate, when I'm in the red, here's what I need. When I'm in the blue, here's what I need. And when I'm in the green, here's what I need. So we're trying to get them to understand their emotions. What does it look like for you when you're in each one of these? And then what is it you need when you're in each one of these, you know, different categories?
Thank you, Lynn. And, you know, I just want to say, you know, this is a therapist tool. A lot of kids use this in occupational therapy or counseling sessions and things like that. And I remember when I learned it and applied it to my house, it was a game changer. Because as a parent, I was trying to problem solve everything or be consistent about following up with discipline all the time. And when I changed it, or when I started the conversation to where are you, right? And we talked about our batteries. Our batteries were running too high, or our batteries are running too low, right? It was like a shortcut. We didn't need to hash everything out. And sometimes I would try to problem solve and help my kids, but they're in the red and it's the exact opposite of what they need.
Right.
Or sometimes my kid would be asking me just something simple, something that they've asked me a million times, but I'm in the red. So they are going to get a different response, right? And it was like code at our house. You know, where are we, right? And like I said, we use batteries, but like, where are we? How low? And that kind of like a shortcut. Oh, and then you start learning in your family, kind of like you said, well, wait a second, so-and-so's read almost every day between 5 and 6. Or one of us wakes up in the red, the other one wakes up in the blue. And once we started noticing each other's patterns, we literally changed some of our schedule. We changed the time we had dinner. We changed the time chores were done. So this concept can really, once you get it and everybody gets it, and kids like it because they get to say what color they're on, not us. Everybody gets to say their color, and that's respected. But it's a different conversation, right? It's like all of a sudden we weren't stuck and having the same problems over and over again. It's like, oh, you're in the red. We go to this list and then we deal with it. We deal with it later. So it's a really great tool. I don't know why they don't send this home with children when they're born in the hospital, but apparently not yet. So this is another tool that as a parent, I felt like, I wish I'd learned this 10 years ago, right? It's I think you call it the time to talk. I think of it as the relationship bullseye. Like, how do I stay in my sweet spot? But you call it the time to talk. Tell us a little bit about this.
Okay. And before I do that, I just want to answer a quick question. You can start very young with your child in how do I describe emotions. So with the teenagers I work with, for example, in my job here, we're getting pretty sophisticated. I want them to flush out the discerning differences of anger, because there's annoyance and irritation and rage and so forth. So I want teenagers to have that kind of a vocabulary and understand that you're not angry when you're just annoyed. But a little child, a toddler, can look at faces. You know, there's lots of great things on the internet and different resources to purchase that are fun young child tools that can help them begin to learn emotions by looking at little happy faces and sad faces and so forth. And you're beginning to get them to communicate then about their emotions. So there's some very age appropriate ways to be able to teach that really from the beginning. Okay, onto this tool. So this tool actually, we became aware of it from a alternative school out of Washington State. The principal there, who was a new principal to this alternative school where they get a lot of the kids who have been disruptive in their home campuses. And typically he's having to have some tough discussions with them, but they're often not in a very calm, safe place to have a discussion. So he used this tool to kind of help get to the place where both people, the adult, you know, and the child are in a calm place to have a discussion. And so he'd bring this little target around and he'd say, okay, well, I'm in the green. I'd be ready to talk to you. How are you doing? And if the child says, I'm not doing good right now, I'm mad at you. Okay. Well, then let's wait a little bit. Can I come back around after school and we can have a conversation? And if that student says, yeah, I think I'll be good by then. Well, then they'll come together and have the conversation that they need to have. If the child is, for example, says, no, I would rip your head off if you came and talked to me right now, or they would probably use some other language. So the teacher or the principal would say, all right, let's sleep on this. Let's wait and talk tomorrow, perhaps. And that really gives honor and time to the child, you know, to be able to get themselves in a calm place. But the cool trick about this tool is the adult has to do the same thing. So if that youth is actually pretty ready to talk, but that adult is fired up and pretty angry about whatever the situation is, then that adult should be saying, I'm so appreciative that you're ready to talk. I can tell I'm not. So how about we wait until tomorrow? Or how about we wait a couple hours? I'll tell you that goes a million miles for a number of reasons. A million miles in terms of really connecting you to that child. Number one, you're honoring them and where they are. And it's unbelievable to them that an adult is going to actually wait a little bit, wait till the next day because the kid's not ready. They feel respected and honored. But also that the adult has to go by the same rule, that you can't talk when you're all upset. If you don't want me to talk when I'm upset, you're like, I can't do it very well. Well, you can't do it very well either, adult. So you need to follow the same rules that you're trying to teach the youth. And so for those two reasons, this kind of a conversation, this kind of a negotiation between the two of you is super important and goes a long way. Now, you have to be a pretty strong adult to be able to say, you know what, I'm not in a good place. I really do want to talk to you. This is important. This is a discussion that needs to happen, but I don't think I do a very good job of it right now. So let's wait a few hours. You've got to be strong enough to be able to do that and calm yourself down in order to have a really good discussion with that kid.
And then come back, right? Because, you know, when we're talking about this in terms of connection, if we're going to use this tool and wait a while and wait a bit, it also speaks volumes that we don't forget or that we're perpetually not available, right? So that coming back together and saying, okay, are we ready now? Is hugely important because kids are very aware, especially older kids, when we don't do what we say we're going to do. So that follow through on this one, if we are going to wait, seems to be super important. I know I've set timers because I've literally worried that I'm going to forget, because you go on. I mean, you get, you know, something happens, someone calls, da da da. I've literally put it on the phone, make sure you, and it sounds absurd, but sometimes I'm so busy with work or whatever that I'm like, oh my God, I got to remember to get back about what happened at choir, right? Because they were in a meltdown. I get, what happened at choir? Don't forget. And I know with younger kids, when my kids were little, I didn't have this, but I did know that the engine plate type thinking. And I don't know if they could have used this at a really young age, but I also, and I'm thinking 3s and 4s, probably 5s, probably 4s and 5s, you could start getting this. But it's like sometimes, you know, we have, you know, the hitting or the punching or the biting or whatever happened at school that day, and you get home and your card was moved from green to yellow to red and, you know, whatever. And I did notice, okay, right then might not be the moment to talk. You know, even if my oldest son, fight, flight, or freeze, he would fight, right? So it's like I had to learn, yes, help him through that apology stage, but wait till he's in green and then he can go apologize. So sometimes it would be 2 hours later and we would literally walk to the neighbor's house and say, he's now ready to say sorry. And he would generally be ready. So I just wanted to speak to that across the different ages, because I know we got, you know, different parents with different kids, but doing that, like you said, Lynn, I think honoring our kids in this way and is so helpful because they do feel honored. And as a parent, I feel like I have a whole new way to talk to them because we're talking about this and it's a mutual thing. How are you doing? Well, how are you doing? And if there's a mutuality there that I didn't have before I started using this. So I really appreciate that.
And I think your point to kind of reminding yourself when you have a busy schedule, reminding yourself that was great, because that's a really important thing, that you're making this conversation important enough to follow back around. And if you have to remind yourself, you have to remind yourself. I think there was a question about having a tight schedule. And I think you can work around that. I think instead of saying, you're not really saying to the child, hey, when do you want to talk? You're giving some choices. You're saying, okay, the next time that we could get together and talk about this, if you're not ready, is actually tonight. So would you be ready tonight? Yes. All right, let's do it tonight. Or if you're thinking they need more time or they think they need more time, then it's tomorrow at this same time. That's when we're going to talk. So you don't want to, if your schedule is super tight, you don't open it up for them to just choose whenever they want to talk. You make an appointment. It's like, okay, well, it'll be tonight then before we go to bed that we'll have this conversation, or it'll be tomorrow or whatever, that works for both your schedules. Because everybody's busy now.
Everybody's busy.
Life is just busy.
And and it's nice too to have times like for us, when it was talk time, we would walk and talk. It's like take a walk. So take a walk was code for whatever unfinished business we haven't tended to that's still on the table. We'd walk and talk it out.
Yeah.
It's 6:56. So I don't think we're gonna get to this today.
Okay.
But do we have any questions?
I think the only one I still see in there is, how do you get yourself calm when your kid is out of control? How do you get yourself calm so you can help them feel safe?
Oh my gosh. Isn't that like the key to everything, right? It's like,
yes, the adult definitely has to be calm.
When we're calm and having a great day, it's like, we got this. It's when we're not that it just feels so hard. But I would almost go back to that engine plate and knowing what it is and learning what it is. What calms me down is taking a walk, having something to eat. Sometimes I notice I come home from work and I'm really keyed up. Half the time I've worked through lunch. So really just taking a walk, having a moment, eating something really helps me calm down. But that's what works for me. You kind of have to, now that you're in the game, just knowing the vocabulary and having the engine plates. And I've seen families that do like an engine plate for every member of the family and put them on the fridge. Or I've seen kids that have these on the door. It's like, I can't even talk about it, but I'm in the red. Even just that can buy you the time to figure it out. And if you don't know, you can also ask your kids and your significant other or your family members or your best friends, because you might be thinking you don't know because it's your blind spot, but the people around you might know exactly what's helpful for you. Anything you want to say to that, Lynn?
No, I think that's good stuff. And I would just add that you recognize where you are is the first step towards you calming down. So even just sort of naming it like, you know what, I'm in the red. I guarantee you're going to go down a couple levels just by naming it and understanding it. And then just explore if you don't already know. You need to explore things like what does calm me down? Dorothy gave a couple examples, but that's a very individualized thing. Could be yoga, could be exercise, could be, taking a nap. It could be just having a few moments and thinking some affirmations, could be a lot of different things. So it's just something to explore.
And I also know, and this is not on the slide deck, but I have to say it because it's been such a key to my success, is that I'm noticing I'm in the red a lot. Maybe I'm really busy at work, or, there's something that's going on above and beyond, like maybe a pandemic. I actually change the expectations. We renegotiate the expectations, or sometimes I will let something slide because I know that stress week is too high and I won't be able to be consistent. So, if takeout's in the budget or whatever, or I need to ask someone for help or do less laundry or whatever it is, so that I can be more in the green. And then that's the conversation. We are at 7:00. We skipped through 2 slides. The very key point that Lynn already said, which is the name it to tame it, actually naming and stating and communicating how you feel, sends calming neurotransmitters that in your brain. It literally calms your brain. And just naming an emotion connects your left side and the right side of your brain and can have a calming effect. So don't underestimate the power of this. just some key points that we kind of went over through is that these set points and how we deal with stress, why we're talking about it today, kids are going to take these stress points and how they relate to stress with them as an adult. So these are really some great tools we can use to set our kids up for success. And teaching them how to self-regulate, be aware of self-regulation, learning that for ourselves is great. Safety and connection, it really, when we're in that place of safety and connection, we're able to access our whole brain. We just get better at problem solving and goal setting and building relationships. And it's skills and take practice. All of this takes practice. If I have one thing to say, like that, and I say this to myself all the time, Lynn, I think it's like, don't worry about being perfect, just be consistent. Right? Because perfection and consistency are two different things.
Yeah.
I blow this all the time, but I'm getting more and more consistent about saying, oh, that was on me. Let's go back and talk about this. I just want to say, I know we're at 7:01. I just want to see if we have any questions, and then Lynn, I'll let you take us home with our takeaways for today.
I don't see any more questions in the chat or in the question and answer. So before we wrap up, if you do have some more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Or if you want to do it anonymously, you can place it in the question and answer.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to spend more time going through these because you just actually talked about them, Dorothy.
That's perfect. Anything else from today that you want to chime in? Anything that's, or do you feel pretty complete with everything?
Yeah, I think to make it one little lesson, safety, connection is what is going to create an environment for you to be able to have that conversation with a child, about behaviors. Those are the key points.
And you can, all the consequences and whatever behavior management system you've got on the fridge or in your back pocket, all of that stuff can still be used.
Absolutely.
With whatever it is that's working for you. Timeout, you lost your screen time, all of that's still in play. You're just tending to this first. And by tending to this first, I have a suspicion that what you're going to find is greater connection, happier kids, and hopefully fewer challenges.
Well, thank you, Dorothy and Lynn, for another marvelous session. I think I've learned a lot, not only as a counselor, but as a parent as well. And sometimes it takes us to take some time to step back and see, one, what we're doing well, and then finding little areas of improvement. I think, during this time, and you both mentioned this pretty consistently throughout the presentation, is we have to make sure that we're giving ourselves grace, because as parents, I think we're sometimes really hard on ourselves, and we do want things to be perfect. And if we can just stick with that consistency and know that we're doing the best that we can and take those little baby steps, I think everything's going to be all right.
Agreed.
I like that. And, if you go to resilientwilco.org, if you are near Google, or obviously you have a computer if you're on this call, but if you Google Resilient Wilco, Williamson County, you'll pop up our webpage, and there's actually copies of the Time to Talk, and there's copies of the engine plate. Somebody right now is doing a video on how kids can do, actually make their own engine plate, and it talks them through it. So the more of these little kind of therapy or neuroscience hacks we find, we're putting them up on that webpage. You can sign up for our newsletter. There's lots of tips coming out in April around rituals and how to build connection through rituals. It's just an absolutely lovely newsletter that's coming out. All those resources are free. We're kind of in this together, all of us. So as we learn, we share.
Well, thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Dorothy and Lynn, for presenting to our parents. Thank you, parents, for taking some time out of your busy day to join us and learn a little bit more. As was mentioned, this information will be posted to our website along with the link to Resilient Wilco, just in case you have a hard time finding that. And it should be posted within the next 48 hours. Thank you all, and I hope that you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.